Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam Hilchos Shechita, Perek Yud Halacha Yud Gimel. The Rambam discusses all the different things that will make an animal considered a treifah, which would render it non-kosher, of course. He says, "B'chein elu shemanu v'amru shehin treifah." All of these situations where the Gemara says, sages say that it's considered a treifah, even though if you follow the medical community, they will tell you that some of these cases of treifah will not die, they could live. And we only go by what the sages enumerated. It says, we go according to the Torah that they instructed us. In other words, that even if the doctors, the experts in the medical field, tell you that this animal could live more than 12 months, and which would make it not a treifah, we do not follow them. We follow what our sages have said. So the question is asked, when it comes to the laws of murder, there's a halacha in Hilchos Rotzeach that if the person, the victim of the murder was a treifah, he had a fatal disease, then the murderer is not subject to the death penalty. And the Rambam writes over there, Sheharing Adam Treifah Potter, he's released from the liability, because he's considered to be as if he was dead. And then the Rambam adds a qualification, every person is presumed to be intact, to have everything that they need to live, and they're not a treifah. Until you know for sure that this person is a treifah, and the doctors will say that this illness has no cure. So the Rambam does rely on doctors. That's a question asked, and Rabbi Chaim Mezer, in the Tzemach Tzedek, says that when it comes to an animal, there's a Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, that there are 70 treifos. And you can't change the halacha regardless of what the doctors say. But a person where there's no halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, a treifah goes by what the doctors say. But the problem with this explanation is that even if you go by halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, it's predicated on the notion that the person will not live. But if we trust the doctors in the case of Retzicha, that the person is a treifah or not a treifah, then why shouldn't we apply the same thing with regard to an animal? So the Shlomo Hyman and also the Shas David Misharim of the Shabbat Rav, they bring the Shechita of Rabbeinu Tam in Chulin that you can't derive the laws of treifos by a person from an animal, because a person has mazal, the Gemara says. In other words, a person has a certain protection and is less vulnerable than the animal. And because of that, you can't compare one to the other. So therefore, it's possible that a blemish that will make an animal a treifah will not make the person a treifah, even though the organs seem to be the same. So the same thing is true with the Rambam over here. The treifah of an animal, it's certain that he's not going to be able to live, even if the doctors say otherwise. But we go by what the Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai says, and we're certain that the animal is not going to live. Even the doctors say otherwise. But by a person, we do rely on the doctors because the person is less vulnerable. That's the answer they give. It's a little difficult answer because the question still remains that if the doctors are reliable, then why shouldn't we say the same thing by an animal? Also, just a little note, there's a famous story of a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek who had an illness, I think it was a lung illness, that could prove to be fatal, but according to what the doctors would say, and the Tzemach Tzedek sent him to Eretz Yisrael because a similar wound, a similar ailment for an animal is a subject of dispute between Rabbi Karo and the Rama. According to Rabbi Karo, the animal is not a treifah. According to Moshe Isilish, who's the Ashkenazic authority, the illness would prove in an animal to be fatal. So that Tzemach Tzedek sent him to Eretz Yisrael, where the Rabbi Yosef Karo is the official authority, so that since he's the one who paskins that the animal will live, the same thing would be true with this chassid, that he also would live. Whereas in Europe and Russia, where Moshe Isilish is the main Pesach, the main authority, he claims that the animal is a Treifah. So if the animal is a Treifah, then the person would be a Treifah. So obviously, it's not consistent with the Shechita of Rabbeinu Tam. But I think a better answer is given by the Maharam Schick. I don't have the Maharam Schick in front of me, so I don't know if he bases it on the Chasam Sofer, a famous Chasam Sofer. There's a big machlekes of poskim about the reliability of physicians in matters of halacha. There are some poskim who say we do rely on them, and there's proof from the Gemara, and there are some poskim who say we don't rely on them. But Chasam Sofer says we rely on them as a safek. That's why when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, even though we don't absolutely trust what the doctors say in halacha, according to the Chasam Sofer and other poskim, but we do consider it a safek. It's a doubt at least, and a safek Pikuach Nefesh, you have to be machmer. So that's why when it comes to giving someone a death penalty for Ritzicha, if the doctors say the person is a Treifah and therefore he's not subject to the death penalty, we accept what the doctor says because it's a safek, and on a safek you're not going to give the person the death penalty. The issue was to whether we rely on the doctors and whether it's only a safek or not. Perhaps there's a famous Ibn Ezra that says when the Perek says that the doctor was given a license to heal by the Torah. The Torah itself says the doctor could heal. And the Ibn Ezra says that's only with an external wound, not with an internal wound. Why? So the logic is because when it's an external wound, they know what's wrong and they know what the prospects are, what the prognosis is. But when it's an internal thing, they're not aware of what's going on. So it could be based on that, the poskim would say that what the doctors tell you is only begeder safek. She'enkein bizman hazeh, where the doctors have tests, it's as if it was an external injury because we can probe beneath the surface with all sorts of tests, with X-rays and MRIs and so on and so forth. So in that case, it could be that what the doctors say has a different geder, a geder of certainty, not just a geder of safek. This is just speculation, and no one should paskin based on that.